Dr. Worcester, have you ever been to Horsehead, New York?
I have not. Have you?
I have not. I've been to Canandaigua, I've been to
Yep.
Rochester, I've been to Albany, I've been to Syracuse, I've been to New York
Morning.
City, Corning. Yeah, yep. Never horseman. But our guest is actually living currently in the one place on the world, Horsehead, New York. Liz Bostwick, what's going on? Welcome to the Community Connection.
Well, thank you. I'm excited to be here, and I'm happy I got to kind of introduce you to my town a little bit.
Love
Pretty
hearing
good.
that.
I didn't know anything about Horsehead. Apparently, some Revolutionary War soldiers had to kill their pack horses and decapitated them, and some Native Americans came across them and was like, "Hey, sounds like the Valley of the Dead Horse Heads thing." So yeah, it's pretty awesome, pretty unique.
It
Appreciate your time.
is, yeah, it is quite the history, and yeah, this is my current town, and then we are soon moving about an hour and a half north, so we'll be up around the Rochester area next. So making our way around New York right now.
Well, that's awesome. Well, welcome to the Community Connection. Eric, we have this just this honor, man, and a blessing to just be able to connect with these thought leaders and these innovators like throughout the country and a little bit
Yes.
throughout the world. And you introduced me to Liz, and you were like, "Hey, we need something about innovation and a culture of innovation, and we got to connect with this author." And here she is, man. She said yes, so that's outstanding with us.
You
So I
said
really
yes.
appreciate it. So we're a sucker for an origin story, Liz, and we would love to know about your origin story because we were talking about your resume right before the show started, and you've got quite an expansive and extensive resume. So tell us a little bit about your origin story and how the world and the universe came together so you to write this amazing book.
So I began teaching early on in my career. I taught second grade and fourth grade. And to be honest, I don't think I was a very innovative teacher when I began. I cared about students. I loved teaching. I cared about their overall wellness and social emotional health. And I really wanted to be the best teacher I could be. But like many teachers, I also taught in the way that felt most familiar to me.
Sure.
So as I was teaching and working with students, I realized that not only were my students not always happy, but I didn't always feel happy. Again, we
Mm.
had a great time, lots of good things happening, but I felt like something was off. And so when our firstborn child came along, I kind of contemplated, do I want to go back into teaching or not? Well, I did return. And then soon, a couple years later, we had our second child. And it was at that time that I began taking our kids to daycare. And as I was talking to other parents who were dropping their kids off, even our daycare provider, and just gaining a better understanding of how busy family life is, and listening to people talk about the hours of homework and how time consuming certain tasks were that were not always necessary, I began making a connection that I could be doing something differently in the classroom. So at that time, I did. I decided to do some different things. At that time, I realized I wanted to create a culture that felt more not just innovative, but also joyful for my students.
Mm.
So I began really leaning into hearing from my students. What do we want our classroom to look like and feel like? What do we want the culture of the classroom to be? How do we really empower our students as leaders? Now, I make this sound like it happened overnight, but it didn't. The reality is that as a mom myself and watching the world through my own kids' lens really lent me the ability to be able to make those connections of like, what do I want my classroom to look and feel like? I know some people talk about Disney World, like Disney World is an
Hmm.
experience. Like, how do you evoke those types of emotions, but in the school setting? Um,
Sure.
and that's
Eric's
not
not a
what I
fan
was,
of Disney World. Eric
yeah.
I'm a fan of going to. I'm a fan of going to Disney World. Not fan of that, but not a fan of calling schools Disney World experiences.
Mm.
Yeah, and I understand that. And so it's not quite what I was looking for, but I had heard that terminology probably starting back around, let's say like 2016-ish, I would say. I started attending conferences at that time. Some of the conferences I attended were like the Model Schools Conference. Bill Daggett was one of the big speakers there at that time. I'm dating myself maybe a little bit. Jimmy Casas was there, Eric Scheninger. And so these were a lot of the people that really spoke my language. Same thing, Laura Fleming. She's done a lot of work with Makerspace. And I began making the connections of like how I can bring this to life in my classroom. But I also knew I had to do it without all of the supports that might be readily available. So over time, I really began looking at like, how do we make small shifts in the classroom? And little by little, starting with culture, then moving into like student leadership, um, identifying like, how do we do makerspace on a small scale?
Mm.
That grew into, hey, we ended up getting a $45,000 grant for makerspace that we got to implement at a larger scale. And so little by little, there are things that we can do as teachers. And as much as my book is Take the Leap, because I do believe that sometimes you just have to jump in and do the work, At the same time, a lot of it is very granular and it goes step by step. And how do you create a culture where innovation can thrive?
So Liz, let me ask you this.
Yeah.
Both you and Nathaniel have mentioned the word innovation, which is great. It sounds great because we like new things. But it can also be a very buzzy word. So when you mention innovation in education, what do you mean by that?
So I agree with you. Sometimes words, especially, I mean, my book was published back in like 2019. So all of these words over the years, they do become a little bit cliche. And so it's kind of like breaking through the noise on like, what does that look like? To me, what it looks like is we oftentimes have very traditional school structures. But what we're looking at is how do we work within those structures to really create innovation in the classroom? How do we take something that we might do every year and reframe it to meet the students who are currently before us? How do we integrate new technologies? How do we get our students to demonstrate their thinking and understanding in a way that's really relevant and meaningful to them? So to me, that's the innovation. It's the fact that we're not just making one change and staying static, but instead we're looking at every single year, every lesson. How do I need to accommodate these students? How do I reach them in today's world? So still staying with your content and your curriculum, still staying with your learning standards, but now shifting into how do I make those adjustments that really draw my kids into learning?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I get to see teachers in classrooms across America, and I am over the moon when a teacher comes up to me or a team comes up to me and says, "These are our standards. This is our curriculum," but then our team kind of is everything in the middle, where we're looking to innovate. We've got a leadership team that just like fosters creativity. They're going to give us like all the resources that we need. We know that the standard is still the standard, and we're going to use the curriculum as the tool, not the rule. But our team comes together, and we're going to try to figure out how to just bring this to life for kids, and they love it because they feel like engaged. Now ultimately the kids have to have we got to have receipts, right? The kids got to have it's not just summer camp. I mean, they got to be able to perform, right? And whatever measures that are. And then Liz, I go into some classrooms where it's just like my innovation is turning the page. That's how I innovate. I go from page 1 to page 2 to page 3 to page 4. And maybe if I'm lucky, I'll skip a page and go from 7 to 9 because I got to have fidelity to the curriculum. And it's like a culture of compliance, right? So, all right, so this is going to be a big esoteric question. How do we go from a culture of creativity or how do we go from a culture of compliancy, there we go, to a culture of creativity? Like fill the gaps in over here, right?
For sure. Well, let me back up a little bit too. And when we talk about my book of Take the Leap, Ignite a Culture of Innovation, let's break down the acronym too. So it is an acronym where LEAP stands for that luminous culture. So culture is always first. So I share that with you because teachers themselves can't get into a creative state if they also feel like everybody is going to constantly nitpick every single thing that they do. So
Right.
first off, our teachers need to feel supported as risk takers, but so do our administrators. So sometimes people don't think about it through that. They think only about, the teacher lens, but also administrators can be scrutinized quite a bit also, especially if you're not seeing the test scores that you might want that could fall on an administrator, not just the teachers. So it's looking at everything really holistically. How do we create a culture where everybody feels supported, and making sure that everybody feels that they can take responsible risks, thoughtful risks even. And then we shift into empowered learning, which we'll come back to later. So it's always like, how do we empower our students? How do we empower our educators? And then the A stands for authenticity and learning. So really thinking about relevant, meaningful, real world, meaningful connections in the classroom. And P is really so that we can support not just our students, but ourselves as educators to reach our full potential. So when you're asking about like, how do we get there? How do we move from compliancy to creativity? It really does start with culture. And not just culture, like, so we're thinking culture in the school, culture in the classroom just as much. So in this case, I'm just going to focus on culture of the classroom.
Sure.
So I think about it in terms of when I was teaching in the classroom, it would be the beginning of the year. We would read the book, and I've shared this on many podcasts, but I would read, one of the books I would read was, What Do You Do with a Big Idea? It would get kids thinking about the fact that they have their own ideas and they can play with them. And so really it's a large concept for kids to think, I have an idea. Well, readily, they don't want to share with each other. Now, that might not be the case in every school. And I will preface with, our school did have a great culture. However, traditional classrooms do teach kids that there's a right answer.
Sure.
So I had a lot of students who would hold back because I don't think they wanted to share their idea. They weren't sure if people were going to like their idea. So that was kind of the culture I was trying to create, where you felt comfortable to share your idea. If you made a mistake, how do we make sure that everybody can share without a risk of humiliation or feeling a failure? So
Liz, you said
yeah,
That's outstanding.
you said your school had a good culture.
yeah, it did.
How did that happen, or what do you mean by that?
So what I mean by that is that I would say our school had a very collaborative culture where all educators in the school really did look to support each other. I had the best team to work alongside. We all collaborated. A lot of the work that I do, I write about, but in my book, I give credit to my team too, because you can't do anything alone. We also had an administrator at our building. Our building principal was extremely supportive. He celebrated all of us. Like, I would have notes left at my desk after observations. Like, obviously he's going to come back and provide me all of the details from my observation, and we'll have our post conference, but he would leave a handwritten note in every classroom focusing on the strengths and the positives. So it was very much a culture where everybody was supported. And actually the book behind me, I've got a book behind me from Peter Reynolds, The North Star. And that was a book that I'm not sure if it was given specifically by our principal or our board, our PTO at the time, but it came from our leadership in our school. But a lot of the work that was being done when I was a classroom teacher was focusing on growth mindset. How do we support students through project-based learning? So I think that really did set a good positive tone.
Are you familiar with Amy Edmondson's work, Liz?
I can't speak to if I feel like I probably should be familiar with her work. I'm familiar with psychological safety, but the name's not familiar off the top of my head.
She's the one who wrote it. So Amy, so if you've heard about it, there you go. She's, I want to say Harvard. I don't know.
She is Harvard. Harvard, correct.
Amy Edmondson, she did this study about failure rates in hospitals. And in one, I don't know if it was the same hospital or two different hospitals, but in one setting, the failure rate was very low, as reported by nurses and doctors. In the other hospital, the failure rate was exceedingly high. However, in the hospital, and I'm probably screwing this up, but bear with me here. In the hospital where the failure rates were low, customer satisfaction, patient satisfaction, morbidity rates, all the bad things were happening in that hospital, even though the failure rate was reported being low. But where this hospital where the failure rate was very high, you would think that it was a traumatic place to be in. It wasn't. It was tip top. And what happened is exactly what you're saying, is that management, leadership had created a culture that encouraged innovation, creativity, trial and error. And they also made it, they wanted you to report out when you made a mistake, because that's how you learn from those things. But when the hospital was hiding that stuff, it was a disaster. So what you've just described, that long kind of like thing, what you just described is that in your setting, it sounded like you had a culture of innovation because you had a culture of safety, and that and that attracted a certain type of person, and you were able to try to be innovative. What would you say to those schools where that culture of safety, it's just not, it's not quite there? Like in your writing, I'm sure you're speaking to schools and speaking to districts and like in consulting. What are you seeing, and like where can we start with taking that leap? Yeah, you like it, taking that leap.
I like how you worked that right in there.
I tried.
So, creating a culture like that when you're talking about system wide beyond looking at the classroom, that does take a little bit of a different attention, because there's a lot of leaders who are involved with that. So for me, it's always making sure that you're providing value to others. So you want to give value, but you also want to acknowledge the value that other people bring. So to me, like, even though I was a classroom teacher, I've also been in leadership roles as a grade level chair. I've worked as an instructional coach and a tech integration specialist. So it's always about adding value to others. So anytime you can add value to people, recognize their strengths, work with them, you have to build those trusting relationships before anything else. And then likewise, even if you're doing any professional development, if you are bringing in, like we brought in PBL Works, formerly known as the Buck Institute. And so we worked with them for 3 years. But what did not happen is our school district did not just bring them in and say, you have to do this. Instead, it was actually a small group of teachers, myself and my husband included, who was a building principal at the time also. We were part of a small group who advocated for that we went to additional administration and we advocated to bring it in, and it was choice-based for who wanted to participate. Now, clearly, not everything is choice-based in a school district, but those are some of the key factors I can share with you that is successful, like acknowledging people, adding value, and letting people feel like they are involved, but not just feel like it, like actually be involved.
Mhm.
When
I
you're
love it.
told you have to do something, you are so much less likely to want to do that and then do it well because you've been told to do it. So I think there's great programs that we see throughout the country, and when you have choice, they tend to go well. And when you're forced, not so well. Speaking of empowering, I don't think we hear enough about empowering students, especially to take ownership of their learning. But I think that's a powerful idea that I don't think we've harnessed enough in education.
Mm.
Can you explain more about what that is and what that looks like in the classroom?
Sure. And sometimes I've had conversations with people who are like, I don't like the word that you have to, they don't like to say, I'm going to empower my students, because it makes it sound like the students don't have power before
Mm.
you provide it to them. So, as with anything in education, anybody can take it and pull it one way or another. The way that I look at empowered learning with students is really helping them to begin to identify what their strengths and passions are. We did work with also incorporating Ignite Your Shine in the classroom. If you're familiar with Lavana Roth, she's a good friend of
Yeah.
mine.
He was on our
So,
show. Look at that. Look at that
oh,
connection.
full
There we go.
circle.
Out
Yeah,
of Tampa. Out of
she,
Tampa.
that's fantastic. So she actually visited my classroom once. We did a lot of work with Ignite Your Shine. So I also give credit to Lavana in my book as well with Ignite Your Shine, and looking at how do we support our students with their strengths, gifts, and talents in the classroom, but then how do we interweave that into the classroom when it comes to learning? So some of the examples of that, when we talk about empowered learning, we did do maker mornings. So kids would be empowered to have the selection of like, how do they want to make and create? And actually, I didn't institute that. It was a student who came to me. Her name was Bloom. She's now in college. She's amazing. But she advocated to have maker mornings. And so we found a way that we could have a rolling cart and do the simple morning piece. Lo and behold, though, we had different stations and kids could do like anything from Makey Makey to Ozobots to playing with Play-Doh. And it was just a creation space. So kids were empowered through choice in that way. But for me, that was a perfect way to kick off the day, because clearly we can't spend the day doing that. We do have to get into the meat of our curriculum, our instruction. But when you can provide kids choice in that way, they are more ready to transition. So let's say our first block of the day was math then. We'd get into our math structures. We would have choice-based activities in there. So no matter what the students were doing, they were essentially checking up the boxes of what needed to be done, but they were empowered to select either what order they were going to work, unless it was like a whole group or small group instruction, that looked different. And then of course, we also would empower our students to demonstrate their thinking in the way that felt best. So I'll kind of break that down a little bit more specifically. When I think about demonstrating their thinking, what I mean by that is if a student really wants to do paper and pencil, they can do that. However, we also used either Book Creator, or at that time, we also used Explain Everything. They could choose their platform. They could add a recording to explain their thinking. They could show their work with a drawing app, with the draw tool, or they could be able to include text. So right off the bat, kids are able to choose, okay, I have to do this math, right? Like we do know that there is some compliance in education, and that is what it is. So these are the skills we need to work on. These are our learning objectives. How I'm going to teach it is one way. How you choose to show your work, engage in the activities, that's going to be your choice. So those are ways that any educator can really build that into the classroom.
Yeah. We've had some, Eric, we've had some interesting perspectives on our show recently. And, you know, there's, there's a train of thought that, we need to keep things more simple. Just kids need to be reading, writing, uh, copious amounts of time, like reading, just read and write about it, Um, kids don't talk enough. We were talking about that. We just had an excellent guest on too that was a little bit counter to that, who all about students working in groups and kind of struggling together and not giving them the right problem, and having them really come up to some creations and stuff. So it's very interesting. The different guests that we have, are going to bring their most authentic experiences and and their own research to the table. Um, Liz, I'm curious about that. Was in your school, public school, private school, charter school,
Public school.
public school. So you got standards that got to get taught. You've got a damn state test that kids have to perform on, right? You've got new teachers that probably just didn't have the bandwidth to be able to differentiate, like you're just talking about, and you've probably got some experienced teachers that have been doing something a certain way that there was no way that they had, you know, the cognitive dissonance to be able to differentiate like that. You know, you were a leader in your school. How did you what's the happy medium? Like, you know what I mean? It's like it's everyone kind of brings their own personality to that classroom, but then again, we got twins, and one twin's in Liz's room, and then the other twin is in Eric's room, and Eric's, you know, just slinging TPT worksheets all damn day. You know what I mean? That's not an equitable experience. So anyway, I hope that question makes sense. A little bit all over the place, but what are your thoughts on that?
First off, I think that's where collaboration plays a major role. We did have twins go through, and we did a teaming structure where I was, and let me say too that my classroom and the classes, the teachers I'm working with, we're talking about one little area, but this works anywhere. Like there's amazing educators out there, and these are things that we talk about more at a large scale. But it really comes down to collaborating with your team. It is really important. I do think once you have somebody that's doing something significantly different, and to your point, somebody else slinging worksheets, that's going to be an issue with parents. My team and I, we really did work so collaboratively that things didn't look identical.
Sure.
And it was interesting because our principal would come and he's like, you guys are all doing kind of the same lesson, but it looks slightly different in each of your rooms. However, we shared all of the resources and the different activities we were doing. So we all did the same project-based learning units. So I will say consistency, collaboration is a must, right? To kind of, if you're talking about like avoiding those types of issues, but on the grand scheme of like, if you're talking about just capacity, like how do you do that? One thing that I always share with people is that it doesn't look the same every single day. You might have some days that look and feel a little bit more traditional than another day. So it's not about shaking up every single thing, every lesson that you're doing. But to me, it's going back to the beginning of the year. It's hitting on solid routines and structures first. Like if you start off your year and you don't want anything too crazy. So for me, it is routines. It is.
Wait. You mean don't smile till Christmas? That's what my mentor told me.
Definitely not that. Oh my gosh, that is one of the biggest fallacies that you could have.
Don't smile at all.
Eric
right?
doesn't smile at all, right?
Don't smile at all. It's not Christmas.
Never.
So for me, but it is smiling in the beginning of the year. It's culture, it's team building, right? It's all of those structures that you want to have in place. But at the same time, it is building clear and consistent routines. Same thing, the first month of school, that's when we really got into like a handful of tools. And we did all of our getting to know you activities, all of my about me type activities, anything that's kind of standard, we integrated those tools so that kids could quickly acclimate to the tools. And then the tools were embedded into learning. So just like we scaffold lessons for students, that's kind of what you're doing for yourself in the classroom. So there should never be the pressure that every single math class is necessarily going to contain as much choice or as much self-direction. It might look different on a daily basis depending on what you're teaching. So, but good practice is good practice. So even if you're not doing choice-based activities during one math lesson one day, quality instruction should always be quality instruction.
So do you see that battle between innovation and trying to have everyone do the same thing? And Provinci, I'll give you the next word after her.
I do. I think that can be twofold. I think number one, you could have somebody who wants to be innovative and create these dynamic experiences that are choice-based for their students, and they might hold back because they don't want the backlash from teammates. They also don't want the backlash from parents, right? That's a very real. On the flip side, I also know the way that I look at it, I always compare it to like a ropes course. My family and I once went to the ropes course, and we have 2 boys, and my husband was there too.
So 3 boys.
Well, technically. And my youngest was just moving fast on the ropes course. He didn't have a worry in the air. I mean, worry in the world. He was like literally hanging at one point and saying, "Look, Mom, no hands." And my heart is like pounding, right? We were in a mall too. So, I mean, you were like way up over like a cement floor.
There's no mulch to pad the fall. Yeah.
Exactly. Now, my other son, he wanted to know he wanted to know the nuts and bolts. He wanted to know where his feet were supposed to go. He kind of wanted to know how to do the course the right way. And then my husband, on the other hand, now he is a risk taker, so I will say that, but he started going out, but he has a physiological response to heights. So he suddenly like felt cold and clammy, and he turned back to like what I would say would be like a safety net. So I also think that when we're talking about educators in schools, we have to remember that just because somebody might not see the value in innovation, it could be also that it's like almost like a fear-based response. Like, this is hardwired. I don't believe in this because I think you're actually not going to hit the standards as well. Or what if my kids don't do as well? What if that comes back on me as an educator and it looks like I failed as a teacher? So I share that story because I think that's a very real thing that we do have to keep in mind that when we're working with teams in schools, it's so important, going back to culture, that people feel safe to take those risks, that there's not going to be some backlash, that they're not going to be faulted if something goes maybe a little awry when it comes to, which frankly, I'll be honest, it's not. If you get kids deeply engaged in the topic and you are making changes, and again, changes don't need to be something crazy. When we say innovation,
Right,
we're talking
sure.
about just like taking traditional industrial style education and making it more applicable for our students. So it goes back to that culture piece, that safety.
Yeah, I agree.
So I guess the question is, if you've got someone who's afraid of heights, does that mean no one else can cross that course? If they don't,
Right.
I guess, is that your take? If you're afraid of heights, nobody should be crossing that rope course because
So
one person who doesn't want
No,
to.
I disagree. Yeah.
Nathaniel?
yeah, so Eric, I feel your cynicism with what I'm about to say, and this is okay. This is all right. So here's the thing with education in my mind. This is my editorial opinion. So Liz, let's say just say you're moving into my area and you want to become a teacher, right? You want to go. You're looking for that third grade position. And you come and you read the vision and mission statement at my school, and you talk to the neighborhood people, and you meet some people in the grocery store, and you're asking about the school, and you say, well, who's the principal? And you say, oh, the principal's this Mr. Provencio guy, and part of this school's culture is that the leadership, and the kind of how the school is doing some things is they are a very PLC centric school. They want to make sure that there's equitable experiences. They foster teamwork. There's some commitments, and they're very, very clear that the school is going to do that, and they're actually looking for people that have the kind of like innovative experiences that you have, because that's what the teams are doing. That'd be a great fit for you, right? But you would still have to interview the school as much as the school is interviewing you for a good fit. Um, so to answer your question, Eric, there's the right school for everybody. And I think that if I'm a teacher that wants to do writing or wants to be creative and have that, I need to do, for my own sanity, my due diligence to make sure that I'm part of the school that fosters my strengths. I think what often happens is that we just hire whoever sometimes has a pulse and a degree, even if they have a degree, right? And they come into the school and it's not a good fit. If I work at In-N-Out Burger, if I own an In-N-Out Burger, you're going to have certain rules that you want to be able to use to make that burger. Now, if you're coming from McDonald's, it might not be a good fit. So to answer your question, I think where schools get in trouble, where culture gets in trouble, is that the candidate or the teacher is not clear on the kind of school they're looking for, and the school is not clear on the kind of candidate they're looking for.
And I appreciate that. I appreciate your answer. Hey, Liz, what excites you and what concerns you about where education is heading in the next decade?
In the next decade, what excites me is the use of quality digital tools in the classroom. I think that there's so much potential for students to be able to demonstrate their understanding in ways that they weren't able to do previously. Additionally, I think all the things we're talking about teachers being stretched thin. How do they have the time and even the wherewithal, right? Like sometimes we have brand new teachers who might not have access to the same learning that other teachers do have had in your school. And now you have so many amazing AI tools that teachers can leverage. Additionally, I also see it as like, I think about all the times that I was working in small groups and I couldn't attend to everybody. I created great choice-based activities. My students were engaged, but we all know the reality is that you always have a couple of students who are going to find their way off task for one reason or another.
Sure.
And I think that there's so much potential when we're talking about tools that allow students to be able to have like a thought partner, be able to ask questions. I think AI is going to be a game changer in the classroom if used well.
If used well, yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah, man, Liz, like I'm over here like envisioning your classroom, and I would have loved for my kids to have been in your classroom. I mean, that sounds awesome, and I bet you got good results too. I bet your results took care of themselves, right?
I will say I had awesome results. Attendance in my class skyrocketed. I had a couple of kids who had some chronic attendance issues, but we saw that completely improve. Additionally, test scores were phenomenal. So that's why I write the book on there are so many ways you can always incorporate learning standards, your curriculum, use everything that you need to be doing, use great instructional practices. Like I've used a lot of Hattie's work. We used all of the cooperative learning structures. But in addition to that, think about the culture that you have in your classroom and what you're doing. You also asked me too about what am I worried about in the next decade of education? And that would be that I love the idea of how AI can be leveraged in the classroom. But every so often you hear about somebody say a concern of like, oh, is AI going to replace a teacher? And that would be my concern, that anybody would ever think that. But I will say, I don't think anything can ever replace a teacher. However, I think a teacher using AI well is always going to be pretty powerful in the classroom in a positive way, you know?
Yeah. So what does that look like? What does it mean to use AI well?
So what I mean by that is, so first off, I do work with brisk teaching. So I'm going to kind of speak to that tool in this capacity. But when it comes to using brisk, for example, you're talking about taking a tool and opening up over anything that you're already doing. So essentially it works where you do. So that means I can open up the AI tool over top of my Google Doc, for example, or even a YouTube video. And I could, let's say I'll go with the YouTube video and I take that YouTube video and I want to think about DOK questions to go along with it. Maybe I'm going to come up with a 4-corner activity, but I need it now. Those are quick ways that I can use that. Additionally, I could even boost an activity and be able to create it so that it's student facing. Now students can watch the video, they can ask questions, they can even do a check for understanding, and then also have any misconceptions clarified. So I think teachers who are using it for either saving time on like busy work or administrative tasks, you have more time now to spend face time with your students and actually teach. Additionally, you might actually get some stronger activities sometimes that you just didn't consider.
Great.
I agree with that. I always think like AI is just an amazing thought partner for teams to have. You know, like the team does the magic, you use AI to kind of like fill in the gaps, and you kind of like have the team kind of like vet it, make sure it's good, and then you roll with that. So I agree. Liz, if you were to talk to that one principal, to just have them take that leap, what would that one thing to be to talk to that school leader about helping their teachers just take that leap? First of all, they got to buy your book, right? And where can they find your book? Wait, let's make sure the administrator knows where to buy your book.
Well, they can find the book anywhere. So you will find it readily. It's on the DBC website. It's also on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. I think I found it on Walmart too. So you can Google it. You're probably going to find it. So that's a good thing. You can always access it that way. And then I would say the first thing for anybody who's looking at innovative practices is, again, just going back to culture, looking at like, why are we doing this? What are the impacts? I think even having teachers start with like, what are the struggles you're seeing in your classroom? What are the struggles we're seeing school-wide? Okay, well, let's back up. What does research say about how we can actually support and pinpoint all of this? Like a lot of my book, I didn't pull it out of the air. A lot of it's very research based. I mean, I have tons of cited sources. So I didn't invent something necessarily. I created the acronym with the work that I'm doing, but I give credit to so many other educators out there. George Couros alike, like, is phenomenal too. Like, he's been a mentor just along my own journey. Dave Burgess too. So you've got a lot of great people out there. And so you'll find a lot of that in my book. AJ Giuliani too is also cited. So we've got lots of great people in there. But it also cites like work like John Hattie's work. So you got a little bit of everything.
I love it. Well, John Hattie's number one is teacher estimates of student achievement, and you know, then you got collective teacher efficacy right behind it. So I listen, you got me sold. I wish I had your book in 2000 when I started teaching, and the most innovative thing that I did was put out some Play-Doh for the kids. That was my innovation. that was it. But that's the best that I had. So Liz, thank you very much. I mean, like, we need more educators and authors and you know, innovative experts like yourself in our classrooms, just to show us what's possible. I think teaching should be fun, right? It should be as fun for the teacher and the educator as it is for the students. I think sometimes we've lost that fun. We've lost a little bit of that. So I would encourage everyone to take a leap. Take a leap and get Liz's book, man. Let's see what mischief we can get into our classrooms together. Really appreciate that. Hang back just for a little bit, Liz, and we'll get you out of here. Thank you very, very much for joining us on the Community Connection. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.